Welcome to Take the Lead Radio with Dr. Diane Hamilton, where she interviews some of the most successful leaders, entrepreneurs, authors, speakers, and other individuals who will inspire you to take the lead in your career and personal life. And now, here is Dr. Diane Hamilton.
I am here with Trey Taylor, who is the Managing Director of Trinity Blue Consulting. He advises and coaches C-suite members, and he is the author of A CEO Only Does Three Things. It's so nice to have you here, Trey.
Diane, so good to be with you again.
This is fun. We got to chat in the past, and I got a lot of background on you. It was so fun because all the things we talked about, and then at the end, we really didn't get to talk about a lot of other things, and I didn't realize how much venture capital stuff that you knew about and all the different aspects of all the investing. I don't know. You just had this so many directions. I didn't know which way to go. So I'm glad we got another chance to chat.
Yeah, good conversation always leads to other good conversations.
It does.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people, if they missed the other show, I just want to get a little background on you real quick for those who aren't familiar with your work.
Yeah, sure. So, I went to law school, came out of law school right in the beginning of the first internet bubble. And so I started with a company that eventually became WebMD. And we were doing a lot of really fun and sort of super cutting edge stuff at that point that you do a deal on Thursday and then Friday morning you'd be on the cover of the Wall Street Journal and that sort of thing. So it was really fun, but it was really like a graduate degree in transactional business. And so, we acquired 78 companies in about 15 months. We did huge mergers with Healthion. We bought up all these other companies. We really put an ecosystem together, and it was really fun to do that. And then in the meantime, we became interested in various other things. So we started a foundation for the company. We started also a venture fund and that sort of thing. And so we did a lot of different things at WebMD. That led in the future for me starting my own sort of venture fund and consulting practice headquartered in Atlanta, which then led me to a lot of other things until September 11th, which dropped me out of that business completely and into in-house positions at Earthlink, AOL, that sort of thing. And then I had a bit of a family tragedy where I had to sort of stop all of that and go home and run my family business. And that's what I've done for the past 15 years. And so it really gave me a great, sort of platform to study CEOs and how they worked in really large and fast moving, high velocity companies. And then distill all of that because I needed it, right? I needed to know how to run my own business at that point. And so a couple of years ago, a friend of mine said, our only obligation in life is to be the person we needed when we were young. And that stuck with me. And so the only gift that I could sort of give my younger self was a handbook for how to be a CEO. And that's how the book came about.
Well, that's such a great background. And it is interesting because you said there is no job description for a CEO sometimes.
Yeah, right.
It is. It's a challenge. It's and a lot of times it's reinventing the wheel. And I think that's unfortunate because there's so much that's been done that's really great. And just before you, I had Kevin Harrington on the show, and I know you knew that because he had written the foreword for your book. And
he did.
He was very.
Kevin and I had a great conversation one day, and he said, "Why don't you put this in a book?" And I said, "Well, it's in a book, and here it is." And he read it, he loved it, and he said, "Well, let me write the foreword for you because this is interesting, and these are principles that I rely on, and that I sort of insist that the companies that I invest in rely on, and that sort of thing." So it became a very good little relationship between us there.
Yeah, he's great. I had met him in the past, and I was really interested in all of his work. And I know he had said he wished he had read that book before he started his first business. And I think that a lot of CEOs, I don't know, what comes to mind is talking to Keith Kroc, who was the CEO and chairman of DocuSign, how he said he knew when he was going to take that job that he was going to end up in the fetal position of once in a while under his desk. And it does do that, right? Because it's so challenging at times. And
it does.
I love that go ahead.
I say in the book that being the CEO is the hardest job by a factor of 3 in the business. And Keith, I know Keith as well. And,
Uh-huh.
I think he's a great example of that because he's so capable, isn't he? I mean,
Oh,
he's had all kinds of business success. It's like, it feels to us like everything that he touches turns to gold,
yeah.
but we don't have to live those sleepless nights with him, do we?
Right.
And so, it's the hardest job completely. And it can reduce you or it can strengthen you. And it's just a matter of what character we bring to it.
I think that, of course, if you've done it once, it helps. But I think for first time CEOs, it's really challenging. And I think that what you wrote about was interesting to me, just because you broke it down into three things. You said that the CEO should be doing these three things. And you say it's culture, people, and numbers. So let's hit each one of those, because culture is a big one for me, because I'm a consultant. I deal with a lot of developing curiosity, perception, emotional intelligence, soft skills, all those kinds of things. So how important is culture, and what happens if the CEO has a negative culture? Can the rest of the company get away from it, or does it just all run downhill?
Yeah, so we identify these three things as things that only the CEO can do, because the CEO has perspective that no one else in the organization has by definition.
Right.
And one thing is not more important than any of the other two things. They all have to work in concert, and they have to add it. They have to be additive to one another. So, when we focus on culture, you've identified, you put your fingertips right on it. There is either a very highly articulated and clear culture that we call an articulated culture, or right, there's a culture that the CEO sort of leaves his or her hands off of and just sort of lets the organization find its own level. We call that a least common denominator culture. And an articulated culture has the effect of benefiting everyone in the ecosystem. It's clean water in the fish tank, and everybody, takes benefit from that, if you think about it that way. A lowest common denominator culture benefits the individual over the organization as a whole.
Right.
And you've seen thousands of businesses, and you've seen various iterations of those things. And it's a spectrum, of course. Nobody gets it right all the time. But there are definitely things that a CEO can professionalize and really sort of get on the map, so that all of the employees and partners and stakeholders in the organization can come to it at the same time and on the same page. And so that's what we work with CEOs to do, is really clearly articulate values and make sure that those values show up in the behaviors of their people, even when people aren't being watched. And so that's the upshot of culture.
I worked for a company where they made us memorize their core culture statement, but it was 3 pages long. Wow. It was, and we had to memorize it. I have a terrible.
Wow. Yeah.
Not good. But of course, the instructor and me, I wanted to, fix the grammar. It was bothering me.
Redline it, huh?
And, it was written. It was like, they wrote it. They were from Charlotte, North Carolina, and you could tell it was really Southern sweet, but not really professional. You know what I mean? And I wanted to fix it. And so when I gave it my own rendition of it, I changed it just a little bit. But the basic idea behind it was really thoughtful, and I think that that's really important. But how long of do you get this code of ethics, you get this code of conduct, you get all these different things that they should create. And actually, I'm teaching a course right now at a university here in Arizona. I teach for a bunch of different universities, and I'm having them talk about their code of conduct. And, we go into Enron, we go to some of these things, what happened, what went wrong at Theranos, what went wrong in these different companies. But do the CEOs spend a lot of time thinking about the culture in terms of like their code of ethics and code of conduct, as they should, do you think?
I think they do, because it's sort of the cool thing to do nowadays, is to talk about your culture. There's a joke in PR circles that if your earnings are bad, you talk about your culture, and if your earnings are good, you talk about your earnings. So we do see that, of course, that people pay lip service to it or something. The biggest fault that I see in the CEO world is imposing a culture from the top down. And again, if your culture does not show up in the behaviors of your people, you don't have that actual culture. You've got a different one, right?
Right.
And so what we encourage, you mentioned Enron. So Enron had a fabulous mission statement. It was engraved with gold letters on marble, and no one acted according to that mission
No.
statement. Why is that? Because the culture demanded different things for success in that organization.
Yeah.
And so the exercise we walk CEOs through is doing about 2 months of observation and jotting down notes of what values do you see actually coming up in the culture. And it's changing the prescription and the lenses to see what's actually there and not what you hope from an aspirational standpoint is there.
Mhm.
And then we take inventory of those values and say, which are the positive ones and which are the negative ones? We want to reinforce one and eliminate the other. And so we're building a cultural apparatus and operating system from the ground up based solely on the values that exist in the organization.
You know, I had Bethany McLean on this show, who wrote the Enron book, you know, and the movie, she was in that movie they made based on it. It's amazing if you read their code of conduct and ethics of what they said and versus what they actually did. And it's a time where we're having things like the Wells Fargo incident and other incidents like that, where there's so much pressure to be successful that sometimes they don't recognize that you can write certain things, but you have to recognize what kind of pressure you're putting on your people to do certain sales and performance goals, right? So
Exactly.
people, speaking of people, is the second. And how does that differ? We're talking about people in terms of culture, but what do you differentiate in terms of people?
Yeah, so the exact point that you're making earlier there is that you can't have a culture without people.
Mhm.
There's no point to it, and then there's an argument: can it even exist without the sort of active participation of the people? People are those who are with you on the ethical journey, wherever it is you're trying to go in life, and using business as a means to get there. You've got adherence to that message, to that cause, along with you. And we spend a ton of time in the consulting practice using organizational psychological techniques to really understand what it is that makes people make people function in the way that they do as individuals.
Right.
And then trying to call out the best parts of that in the collective so that we achieve our goals. And so we have a very different recruiting strategy built into our system. We call it the 4 C's, where we interview people for their cultural awareness and cultural fit, for their their capabilities second, for their compensation needs third, and for their commitment needs last. And it flips it on its head a little bit. We encourage companies to adopt that 4C strategy, and what it does is it lets candidates write their own job offer at the end of the process. And that's a thing that people look at and say, oh my gosh, that's so weird, it would never work here. And we have really good successes and a lot of success stories that come from that. But the entire thing of reconsidering how people fit into a cultural articulation is the key point there. A lot of CEOs look at it and say, hiring is not my job, it's HR's job. And I take a very strong stance against that point. Larry Page at Google, for example, when he was the CEO, reviewed every single application for somebody before they could be extended a job offer. And he was all over the world, running one of the fastest growing phenomena companies in the world. And he could find time to do it. And yet we can't.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that I believe that as much. And so, we definitely encourage the CEO to be as highly involved in people hiring and retention. There's a lot of retention tools that we use as well, because we think that's something that really only the CEO can do at the end of the day.
As you're talking about your C's, I'm of course jumping to curiosity in my mind, just because that's what I study. And I was thinking about how Francesca Gino was on my show from Harvard talking about her case for curiosity that was in HBR. And they said that in a lot of the research that I've read that backs up what she wrote is, a lot of leaders think they encourage curiosity, but then when you ask their employees, they go, not so much, right?
Not so much, yeah.
So, you can hire for curiosity, but the hiring process is very challenging, to even, and a lot of companies already have most of their employees in place. So how do you develop curiosity in your employees when you've already pretty much got everybody on board?
So it has to be, again, part of the culture. And then, that culture shows up in the behavior of the people that are on the journey with you. And then you have to be very clear that if that is a goal, if it's an aspirational value to hold for the business, then you have to make sure that your internal philosophies support that as well. So for example, in my organization, we have 13 value statements. We call them the B attitudes. And each one is important. Number 11 for us is to be intrepid, right? And in that value, we talk a lot about it is a great uncharted value for us. The more curiosity we have and the more risk-taking courage we have, this is what really propels the growth of our firm in the future. So for example, if we see a product need that isn't being met today, usually when we trace that back, it comes out of a curious question where somebody says, well, why isn't this being done? Mm-hmm. And if I shut that down as a CEO, either explicitly or implicitly by my actions, then, I can really be damaging the future of the firm in doing that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think it's such an important point, and curiosity came into play. And I have another book coming out on perception. And perception to me is a combination of EQ, IQ, CQ for curiosity quotient, CQ for cultural quotient. And we're touching on a lot of these things, that it's this process that we go through when we make decisions. We're evaluating, predicting, all interpreting and coming to conclusions based on all of these other factors. So I think what you're talking about here is really critical to the success of organizations, because I think right now we've got more diversity that in groups, and we need that. But then we also have more conflict with that diversity. And the more we question things and we build that empathy to be able to see things from other people's perspectives. Just want to see if you touch on perception at all and what you think of that point.
I do, absolutely. And it's interesting because one of the things in the book, in the final chapter of the book, is where I give sort of the charge to CEOs to say, now that you know these things, it's now important for you to perceive how they actually work in the firm and what kind of changes that you're making. And I take perception and change it out to be preception a little bit. Because a lot of times you can see things as the leader inside of people before they can see it inside of themselves. And so we believe that leaders should precept knowledge of people, and we believe that they should evoke that knowledge. So perception and evocation is the charge that I live with each CEO in the final chapter of the book. Yeah.
I like that because it ties into foresight and being proactive and a lot of the things, the famous Stephen Covey proactive kind of thinking. And I think that we need a lot of that. And a lot of people are so focused on specific things. And sometimes you don't know what you could see in somebody else that they don't even see in themselves. And I love it for that reason. I want to jump to the third thing though, because you have culture, you have people, you have numbers. Numbers is not my favorite part sometimes.
Sure.
So I think help people like me who maybe are CEOs who really don't want to just spend all day looking at balance sheets and thinking numbers.
Yeah, so numbers isn't only dollars. Right. We make that point in the book right up front, because we can sort of go glassy-eyed when confronted with a wall of numbers, of course. And some CEOs say, oh, well, numbers are not my job. That's the job of the CFO. And I disagree completely, because I think that one of the things that a CEO does that no one else can do is to set the agenda. Yeah. And so it isn't necessarily, how do we measure success or something of that nature? That is a very tactical thing. Rather, what it is what does success look like? So what's the agenda? So of course, there are financial measurements to success. We're not going to get away from that as much as we may want to on occasion. Right. We're not going to get away from that. But there are other measurements as well. So we have a list of KPIs. I'm sure your business does, and the businesses, of people that listen to the show, they all have those, of course. And some of them are hard numbers and some of them are soft numbers. So there's an old joke in consulting circles that everyone has a number. And, even down to the receptionist, which is 2 rings good, 3 rings bad, so everybody can sort of quantify the quality of work that they bring to the table. And that's where we get excited. The second part of that, the second pillar of that is that a CEO who is confident in their ability to hit numbers and to manage that numbers process should also be confident in sharing those numbers at a highly transparent level with the entire organization. So in my own firm, we have a P&L review every single quarter. So everyone, no matter what their level of the organization, looks and sees what we spent, every dime that got spent, every dime that came in the door. They know implicitly who's doing their job and who isn't when they see those numbers.
Right.
And we build incentive structures based on those numbers as well. So you might say, well, Trey, you're still talking financials. Not necessarily. So if we have people who hit their soft number goals each quarter, then they receive time off. They receive special privileges, maybe in the workplace. They get to go to the Christmas party at the end of the year or something of that nature.
Mm-hmm.
We have a lot of fun in dialing up and down those different numbers each year, and we're extraordinarily transparent. What it does is it unlocks creative potential that we have historically ignored in American business. I'll give you an example. In 2008 and 2009, when the world was just falling apart, we knew that in our business we needed to shave as much of the fat off of the cow as we could. And so because we had just gone through this exercise and everyone knew our numbers, I came back to the table and said, guys, I need an extra $200,000 in bottom line. And we each shared some ideas on how we could accomplish that. And we got to the number. And I think that doing so really made the next couple of years for us a lot easier than it would have been if I was trying to carry a larger load that way. One of the ladies that worked with us said, well, look, my mother is she runs a company. It's a great consumer of what we've done. You guys have never called on me. Let me see if I can get an appointment with her. We did. We ended up selling $300,000 contract to her company, did great work for them. She referred us to several other companies in the same vertical. That never would have happened if I wasn't transparent, with the entire company, and had someone who was literally, a receptionist in the company created $1.5 million of revenue over a couple of years for us, solely because she knew we needed it. And that's, awesome. That's where transparency really comes in. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's a great story. And it brings to mind, just thinking of so many things that CEOs and discussions I've had with them on the show and the things that concern them. Did you deal at all with boards and who to have on your board? I mean, do CEOs struggle with that in these three things of culture, people, numbers? I'm just curious if you touch on that, because I haven't seen the final version.
No, so we don't actually tie it in the book that way, because so many of our clients are dealing with that. But the real point there is that the same rubric, culture, people, numbers, is what you should use to recruit members of the board. In other words, people who share the same values that you do, who see the vision and the journey in the same way that you do.
Right.
And then, of course, when I counsel CEOs and consult with them, a lot of times there's hurt feelings. Like I went to the board meeting and they didn't agree with 100% of what I said. And I don't know, it's this existential problem. And you have to sort of bring them back to the point that, the board is supposedly there to, empower the company and give you all different perspectives, not just the perspectives that you get as the head of the organization.
Yeah, I think that's so important. Well, I'm so excited for your book. And Trey, I was really grateful that you would do the show again, because I was very fascinated by the last conversation. I think, every time I talk to you, it's like an onion. We keep on peeling all these layers of things that you do. And I love it. And so when can your book, it's going to be available soon, and probably by the time this airs. So how can they find you? How can they follow you? And can you give us some website or anything in social media to follow?
Yeah, for sure. So the book does launch November the 10th. It'll be on Amazon, paperback, hardback, that sort of thing. We have a audiobook in production as well for release in 2021. So we can listen to the book while we're getting our exercise in or our commute in. That'll be great. My personal website is www.trinity-blue.com. That's the consulting firm. It'll have a page on the book there as well. And if anyone wants to reach out to discuss the book, we can do that. And then we're going to do a virtual book club with the author. We'll do 2 or 3 of those next year, and you can find those announcements on the website.
That's awesome. Well, Trey, thank you so much. It was so much fun to have you on the show.
Always fun to be with you, Diane, and really appreciate the work that you do, and the introductions that you make offline are so valuable to us, and just appreciate you as a resource when it comes to that.
Likewise. This is, it's always been great, the back and forth, and I wish you great success with your book. And we will be back right after this message.